สวัสดีค่ะ Good morning. Welcome to the last day of Poultry Week Webinar by Informa Markets, the vertical of the livestock exhibition in Vietnam, Malaysia, and Philippines. Today with me, Rose Chitanuwat, that I'm the moderator for today's session. We're gonna have another two sessions after this session for today based on the technical aspect on biosecurity and feed nutrition. Today we have our expert who is the financial consultant, economist, and working around the world. Start his career, I would say, in Brazil, and now 22 years already in Thailand, and engaged with a lot of integrator in Thailand. For today, the webinar is to give you the knowledge update since the African swine fever hit into China and some of the countries in Southeast Asia. That also one of the reasons that the Informa Markets decide not to pursue the show in Philippines, because we worried about the African swine fever will get effect into the livestock industry in Philippines. Together with me, I have Mr. Gordon Butland. He is the co-founder and director of the Agriconsultants. He has been studying a lot on the trade data and what is the movement for the integrator, especially when ASF come in and COVID pandemic happen in the world. What will be the effect on the meat production, supply, and demand? So the thing is the effect around the world, whether the COVID effect in Brazil, the African swine fever effect in China. The effect is not only on the pig meat production, but definitely its opportunity arise around poultry meat production, the seafood demand, and even the change of consumer pattern into the affordable wholesome food for being the choice of customer. Not only that, there is very interesting aspect that we should know that the ASF affect not only for the meat sector, but also the food ingredients, because part of it, like the way that can supply to the cow market, or even the shorten of some of feed additive and ingredients in the sector. So right now, I would not waste much time in explaining, but I would like to check Mr. Gordon is ready. Okay, we are going to have Mr. Gordon Butland with us on the topic African swine fever and COVID-19. Then what is the effect to Southeast Asia poultry and pork industry? Please, Mr. Gordon.
Good morning. Well, actually, we're going to talk about 3 viruses today. We're going to talk about the ASF, the COVID, and we still have AI, which is affecting especially some of the topics we're going to talk about in China. Now, it's very important. You see here, I have a list of data that you need to monitor on a regular basis. You can be out of date in 15 days. All of a sudden, China has a bigger problem with the USA, that affects us. China the other day had a problem with Australia complaining. They stopped the beef export. So as I say, in 15 days, you can be out of date. And I've given a list of items that you should be checking on a regular basis, the China monthly meat imports or protein imports and where they come from. The second item, a bit more difficult, is how many sows, new and replacement, are being started in China. This is I'll come on to that. The number of chicken grandparents that are imported, and then the prices of hogs and piglets and the price of products in supermarkets in China. And that will give an indication if the level of production is recovering. And then, as I said, the politics. So starting, and some of you might have seen this, probably seen this before, is what did the Chinese eat before ASF? So as you can see, and this was a big surprise for me and for many people, by far and away, the largest protein consumed was fish, with 64 kilo per capita, and then pork coming in at 54, and then eggs very, very high. And that, of course, has a knock-on effect to chicken. When the hen is finished laying, then that hen goes for actually chicken consumption. And then in the blue at the bottom, rather small, which is poultry, and that is poultry as a whole. That is chicken, duck, goose, and that is the Chinese chicken, the colored bird, and the white feathered bird. So everything that I am doing now, I'm going back to compare to the starting point. Then quite early on in the first semester of last year, Rabobank in one of their presentations showed this graph of where was the potential, they saw it, the potential substitution of the over 20 million metric tons of pork that were going to be reduced between 2018 and the current year 2020. Now we have some more updated information. It's changed a little bit, but overall, this pie chart has not changed. And the key question for a lot of you who might have invested or thinking about investing to take advantage to export into China is how long this situation will happen before it gets back to normal in China. My own personal opinion is that they will never go back to the exact level of pork consumption, as you saw before it already started to go down. And you're probably looking between 4 and 7 years. The fish is a big part of this. You see this, an extra 6 million tons. That's about a 10% increase. Apparently that's been hit quite hard by COVID, so it would take a couple of months before we see where we are there. On the increase in domestic production of chicken, this will take time, and I will go into a bit more detail. And up on the top left-hand corner, you see the imports of pork, beef, and chicken. And this is already higher. And what we will see probably is more chicken imports and less beef imports. And overall, it will take time. And then you have to consider in China, you have two very big extremes in terms of who are the consumers. So on one side, you have the traditional people from the interior. They have limited resources and more reluctant to change in general. But then in the Beijings and the Shanghais with higher incomes, more sophistication, they can afford what they want. And if they used to eat pork and then the pork is either not available or just too expensive, they will not change to eat chicken feet. They will want meat, and they will want chicken meat. So the actual mix of products being imported into China compared with about 2 years ago has changed substantially. Now, I know we have many people who are chicken people assisting. So this is the pork cycle. So once you have a new a gilt, which is a sow which has never had any offspring. So by the time that gets through its cycle, it's nearly 1 year. And a sow usually will have about 5 litters. It has 2.1, 2.2 litters a year. And overall in its life about 5. But we are sure that in China, under the current economic conditions, that will probably go to maybe 7 or 8. So you need a new sow every 3 to 4 years. So that means you're always replacing, when you're back to normal, about 30% a year of the sows. Plus, we have to. China had about 40 million sows before the problem, and they lost about 20 million. Not all because of sickness, but a lot of it, as has already been said many times, for economic reasons. People culled and sold as meat because they were not very sure that they would get any economic benefit. But they are starting, and you see here, this has just come out from last week, 3 huge jumbo planes with swine genetics from the UK to China to start to replace, to get back some of those 20 million sows that have been lost. Now on the chicken cycle, China starts from the grandparents. From the time that you have the import of a grandparent until the end of the meat that comes out of this, you're talking about 2 years. And in order to increase the production sustainably, it takes you from zero, it takes you 103 weeks to reach a new plateau. So the increase, the sustainable increase is going to be slow, but then China is using a lot of molting and other things to try to compensate a little bit for the problems that they are having. Now here are the imports into China of the grandparents, and you see on the left-hand side, back in 2000, well, before 2014, virtually everything came from the US. Then the US had AI. Then it moved to France, and then France had AI. Then it moved to Spain, and starting also then in New Zealand. Spain had a problem with AI, and then they moved to Poland. So you basically had New Zealand, which is both Cobb and Aviagen, and then the yellow line was from Poland, which was all Hubbard. And now on the right-hand side, you see what's happened recently. So already now in 2020, there's been a serious outbreak of AI in Poland. So you see that all the imports this year have been from New Zealand, and that level would give them less than what came in to China in the prior year, which was about 1 million. And I estimate they need about 1.2 million to rebuild all the chain. Now, the US has been approved again to send grandparents. And the latest information I've heard is that hopefully by about August, September, you will start to see grandparents coming from the US to China, and that will take away the pressure and will not create any problems for future growth. So let's have a look at the China trade update. Now, here's the past over the last 2 years, and this does not include Hong Kong. And you see here then the blue is obviously the swine, the pork, the red is the chicken, and then the gray is the beef. And if you take the increase from the first quarter of 2019 to the first quarter and second quarter 2020, that on an annual basis is about 4 million metric tons increase in meat imports, which is about the same level of what the Rabobank predicted over a year ago. But you cannot forget that on the right-hand side, that 60 to 70% of what is imported by Hong Kong is then goes on to PRC. So this is the chicken imports in 2020 by country. And you see there by far and away, Brazil is the biggest, the blue line. Now, this is what has arrived in China, and I will explain why I'm saying arrived. And there is now, and you see the source there, there's a very good customs website in China. It comes out now about the 23rd of the month, so you can keep up to date with what comes into China and where it comes from. Now, this is what has left the countries, the three main countries, Brazil, Thailand, US. And Brazil and the US take nearly 50 days from time of shipment to arrival in China. So as you saw from before, US was not yet a major player on arrival into China, but you can see here that already May exports from Brazil and the US, quite very similar. Thailand, now we have 22 plants approved against about 14 earlier in the year. In May, 19 of those 22 already exported to China. So we do expect a little bit more, but I will come on to more detail when we look at Thailand specifically. And then Hong Kong has gone down as plants that were not approved for mainland China. What did they do? They exported to Hong Kong. As they become approved for mainland China, they stop exporting to Hong Kong. And this is, you can see the US, the red going down, the yellow going down. So this is quite normal. And Thailand, very, very important part is what parts of this, in terms of trade, there's no such thing as a chicken. There are the wings of the chicken, the breast of the chicken, the legs of the chicken, and the breast of the chicken. And we'll come on to the breast problem a little bit later, but you can see there, the three main products are the wings, the feet, the paws, and the leg. Now, if you go back about 18 months, it was virtually 70 to 80% would have been wings and paws. But as I said, some of the consumers, they don't want to eat paws if they can't eat pork. They want leg meat. So then the bone-in leg has been more and more imported. And I can see these three parts more or less being equal. And then we see the main suppliers. So you see here, the USA, and this is in May, the USA, 57% of its exports to China were the paws, and only about 30% were the legs. Thailand and Brazil are more even between the leg, the paw, and the wings, but very, very little breast meat. Now, we have heard that they are producing a dumpling with a mixture of breast meat and pork. So hopefully China will import more breast meat. And then this is important. Each country has to be a little bit careful of how dependent it becomes on China. If you suddenly then have an issue, political issue or something with China, and you have, as Thailand has 36% of its raw poultry exports are now going to China in May. Brazil, 23% of its cut-up raw exports went to China, and the US is 18%. So these are substantial quantities, so you really don't want to get into any arguments. The pork imports mostly from Europe. The US are, I'm sure that the US will increase their part. You see there in the first quarter of 2020. And even though nominally there's a very, very high tariff, very high duty, we have heard that at the moment, the duty is not being charged. And looking at the rest of Asia, so in Vietnam, your production has gone down by about 19%. Imports have gone up, but there's not been a complete substitution of the pork production, loss in production by pork imports. And a part of that has been taken up by increase in imports. And we'll come to that, imports of chicken. Similar in the Philippines, you've lost 9% of your production, increase in imports, and you've also increased your imports significantly of chicken, which I will come on to. So that's an update of ASF, and I will repeat that you really need to follow these things on a regular basis. There are plenty of news coming out from a lot of sources, and every time something seems to happen, you should look into it. How is it going to affect your country, and how is it going to affect your company? So let's go on to COVID-19. And those who've seen before that we've got this, after the earthquake, there's often a tsunami. And now we still don't know the size of this tsunami. We're getting a lot of contradiction of the macroeconomic side of what's going to happen. And on consumption, we are a little bit confused with what's happening with people getting subsidies from governments, but those subsidies won't last forever. And I will have a look now at the general macroeconomic. So COVID, there's three sources of disruption. We have the demand, which I'll go into detail. We have the logistics, and as Kun Rose said, you have ingredients and you have problems of actual logistics of ports being full. And there is a new thing now in China because of the problem a couple of weeks ago that started in Beijing, which was traced to salmon in a market. They then went to Norway, and they're worried that COVID will be imported together with frozen meat. They have suspended imports from some companies in US, in Brazil, and in Europe that have had a lot of infection, who have closed and some of them have closed their plants. But there's still a worry that COVID can survive on frozen product. It is not being proven, but we know that with AI, it would survive even up to 1 year. This is one of the problems now for unloading in China, that there is a lot more testing that is had to be done by exporters. They have to give a certificate that their product is COVID-free, but it is tested again when it arrives in China. So let's have a look at demand. And first we have to look at the macroeconomics. Now in Asia, we don't have the very comfortable safety nets that they've had in the US and in the UK. In fact, in the US, they got to such a stage, it was better to stay at home and say that you were sick than actually go to work. You got more money. In Brazil, they will get about $120 a month. Similarly then around Asia, Asia in Thailand, it's 5,000 baht, which is about $160. And going around the rest of Asia, what I've heard, it's in the region of between $100 and $150 a month. But not everybody has been approved. And how long can governments keep helping people? Okay, so that safety net is very important. And I personally think that the worst effect on economic effect on demand, we haven't yet seen it in Asia. So going back a little bit in history, when we had in the 90s and the early 2000s, and we had a huge growth in the consumption of protein in general, and especially with chicken, we used to say that there was a very, very strong correlation between the per capita income and the per capita consumption of meat. I've shown the US, but this would be a similar graph everywhere in the world, and a very, very high level of correlation between protein consumption and increase in the GDP per capita. And then in nearly every case, the most favored protein was chicken, because it was the cheapest protein available. And then in 2008, 2009, there was a financial crisis in the developed world, as we got hit in Asia, but not so bad. And you see here that their GDP in the 5 main economies in the world dropped up to about 5% in their GDP. And this had a knock-on effect on consumption of protein in the world. It went back slightly, but it also changed a lot of people's habits. And a very good example is in the UK, or cheapest food is something called a shepherd's pie, which is mincemeat with potato. And there was suddenly a huge surge in the sale of mincemeat, as people were moving away from what they couldn't afford. So your most expensive cuts of beef went to lower cuts, went to quick service restaurants. So you had some very definite effects, and some of them became permanent. What do I mean by this? If you yourself, if you have a favorite food and suddenly it's not available for 2 or 3 months, it's suddenly available, you will go back to what you used to eat. If it goes for a year and you permanently change some of your menu, then it is possible that you will not go back completely to where you were before. So we will probably see some longer term changes in habits. Hopefully eating more breast meat in Asia and less dark meat. Already in the Western world, they are eating more dark meat and reducing their breast meat. So this is what the forecast of the COVID impact on GDP in 2020. The green are the big 3 exporters, Thailand, Brazil, and the US. The yellow are the big importers, and then the red are the more Asian and ASEAN, and then we have South Korea and India. Now, these, every time I look at the television or look on the internet, these numbers seem to change, and they seem to get worse all the time. And the quarter that we are in, well, we've just finished the second quarter, you will see that you've had double-digit negative GDP, and this will have an effect on consumption. Why do I say that? Again, go back to a slide which I prepared more than 10 years ago. As you move from one income level, we broke the world down into about 5 equal quintiles of income. So you had $1 a day, the gray one, where people eat virtually nothing, moving up to $5 a day, and then moving up to like $1,000 a year. And you see how the very, very large increase in consumption for chicken and for all the meats. You had from that where people had no income up to about $10,000 a year. I don't have COVID, by the way, it's just the aircon. Now, what we have to, we're not quite sure how this is going to act when it goes the other way, when people who were earning, say, $1,000 a year, when it goes down to 500, how they will have to change. So far, this has been distorted by the subsidies of governments. But when you hear the number of unemployed in many countries around the world, in Brazil, we now have 41 million people unemployed, but we have not yet seen the same effect on demand in each of the countries. So one of the things that I personally am following very, very closely in Thailand and China is actually at supermarket level, what are the level of prices, and as far as possible, see what volumes are being sold. So we have a question that demand is going to hit, local demand is going to be hit everywhere. And most of you, especially Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, you are not exporters, but you are importing countries. And I can assure you that the main suppliers, Brazil, especially the EU, is targeting you, and I will come on to that. So can exports compensate? Is China the salvation? And again, I've put some factors that affect exports that you have to accompany of what's happening. So the main thing first is you have to, when you are an exporter and or in countries where you cut up all the bird. Now, in the Philippines, a lot of the product is sold as a whole bird. In Malaysia, a lot of the product is sold as a whole bird. But once you start to cut up the chicken, and the next slide will show this, you have to sell every part of the chicken. The exchange rates, as I will show, very big factor affecting exports and obviously imports. The shipping time And then the logistics availability of the containers, port congestion, cold storage at destination. Suddenly, in the last couple of months, imports into into Singapore increased fantastic, both from, especially from Thailand, but also from Brazil. And after a little bit of investigation, we found that they deliberately, because they were worried about COVID, they imported a lot, and then they started to have difficulties in storage supply. And also with this testing that I talked about in China, we do hear that there are quite a few vessels waiting off some of the principal ports. So this is when you are an exporter, or even though if you are a domestic and you cut up the chicken, you have to, as I said before, you have to get rid of everything. Now, for the Brazil and especially Thailand, we sell our breast meat to Europe, a little bit to the Middle East. We sell the feet and the legs and the wings to China. To Japan, we sell all the legs, a little bit of breast. And then for the Middle East, there is the whole chicken that goes to the Middle East. Now, Thailand, its core business is export. If there was not an export business, there would not be an industry in Thailand of the size that it is. And there you see a breakdown. The breast is without the bone, without the skin is 18%. The leg with the bone is 25%. The leg without the bone is 18%. The feet are only 2 to 3%. And the wings are 8%. And I will come back to this when I talk about Thailand. And the other thing is, I was very surprised in March, April, how good were the exports from Thailand and from Brazil. And then I went back and had a look, what is the timeline between the actual chick laying the egg and actually taken off the shelf in the UK and eaten. And even without inventories in the middle, you're talking about nearly 4 months. And we know now there are quite a lot of inventories, okay? So I've been warning people that when they hear that the UK is coming back and consumption is coming back, that the food service is opening up, it's not going to have an immediate effect on Thai exports and Brazil exports, and obviously then production. Now, we will come to production here in a minute. Now, there are 4 big exporters in the world. You see here, Brazil, US, the EU, and Thailand. And whereas Brazil exports to 100-odd countries, the US also, but it does not export to, or exports very, very little to Japan. And in Thailand, we don't export to many countries. We only really, most of our exports go to Japan and the EU, and then lately, over the last 18 months, more and more has gone to China. And then it's not only the exporters, but you have to look at the importers. So if the importers are not there, the exporters have nowhere to export to. So we have 15 countries. A lot is often said, oh, there's 150 countries in the world that people export to, but 15 countries represent 70% of all the imports. And then another 20, the next 20 countries import 21. So you have 35 countries, which are 91% of the imports. And you see there, Japan is number 1, China, and you see above China, there's a little black line. That is where I expect China to go in 2020. So China will be the largest single importer. And then you have from which countries. So you can see there where Thailand exports to, and 6 of these countries are in Asia. As I said before, a few of you are a target. You see that in the Philippines, you are in this list. Vietnam is also in this list. Taiwan is in this list. Malaysia is not on this list, but Malaysia certainly is in the next 20. So let's have a look at Thailand. And there are two main cooked exporters in Thailand, Cargill and Tyson. But first we'll have a look at the exchange rate. So this is the Thai exchange rate this year. So yes, we went up to nearly 33. And then rather difficult to understand, and even the newspapers don't understand, we've gone back and strengthened, and we even got below 31 in a couple of days over the last couple of weeks, which is very strange, seeing that there are zero tourists have been coming. So a big source of foreign exchange coming into Thailand suddenly ceased to exist. And when we compare that now with Brazil, which is our main competitor in some markets, because of economic but mainly political reasons, you see a huge increase to 40% gone down, and now we are going back up again with the virus really affecting in a large scale to Brazil. So let's have a look where Thailand, I've shown the last 6 to 7 months. The red is the cooked, which is less affected by economies and the virus. And then the yellow. So we have changed. So you see way back in October, there was 50,000 tons of cooked, 30,000 tons of raw. In the last month, we are 35 raw, 42 cooked. Why? One of our main cooked markets is the EU. And within the EU, our cooked market is the UK. And in the UK, the whole food service business was stopped. The McDonald's, the KFCs, they just closed. And a lot of Thai product went into that segment. On the yellow, which is the raw, we are seeing there the consequences of the increase in exports basically to China. And here you have the raw exports, and the red is China. It went down a little bit, I think, as an effect on COVID, but now it's coming back. And I am expecting about 14,000 tons a month. And then blue, you see a very high number in March, but they stocked up for the Olympics. And then since the Olympics, they've gone down, but basically because they were overstocked. And I do expect them to go back to normal in future months. Now, Europe, and that's the brown line, and the UK, a very big drop between March and April for the raw, but on the cooked, it is even more example of really how much it's dropped. So you see there the red, which is the UK, and the brown to Europe. So you see between March and June, between May and March, there's 6,000 metric tons of product less to Europe. And that is virtually all breast meat. And if you put that back to the number of birds, that is the breast from 13 million live birds. And that is over 10% of the capacity of the exporters in Thailand. And we know they've reduced production. And this is starting to lead to a shortage in wings and legs to other parts of Asia. And we do hear that more chicks are being put on the ground to increase production again in August, September. But there is a danger that we have finish up with more and more inventory of the breast meat. Now, we have a problem in really the rest of the world except for the USA. We don't have wonderful statistics. So in the US, you get every week how many eggs are set in the hatcheries, how many chicks are sent to the farms, how many hogs, piglets, etc., everything that is produced. And so we don't have that around. We don't even have it in Brazil. We have it a little bit better, but around Asia, it is very, very difficult to have this data to take decisions. And this is a problem for all of us. So let's have a look at some of the importers of poultry, especially. So Japan, they import nearly 50-50 now, cooked and raw. The cooked, their total imports, as you see, have now flattened out over the last 3 years, quite a large increase since 2008. And then their raw meat imports virtually all came from Brazil. If you remember, from Thailand, we were completely suspended from exporting to Japan for more than 10 years. Why? We did not really deal with the AI situation as it should have been dealt with. Japan lost its confidence, and from 2004, we only really got back into exporting raw meat to Japan in 2014. And you saw there then in 2011, they had the tsunami. They increased more, but Brazil had a huge market share. Now, since Thailand has come back, you see that the actual exports from Brazil have not really gone down, although their market share has reduced significantly. But the problem is Brazil is the price driver. So over the last couple of months, there have been very, very big drop in prices. Products which were over $2,000, $2,200 are now about $1,700. And that obviously then will affect us in the rest of Asia. The cooked, there are two suppliers. It's China and Thailand. China used to be the biggest, and it's mostly leg meat. China used to have a 60% market share compared to 40% to Thailand. Then they had the melamine crisis, you probably all remember, in 2009, 2010, and it changed to Thailand. And then they got back again to about, just over 50%, 2012, 13. And then they had the two food scandals with KFC, etc. And then we are now, Thailand lately has had 65% market share to 35%. So I do expect this to go forward. I don't expect Chinese exports to Japan to increase significantly in the near future. Okay, the EU. So here I'm showing 2015 to 2019. Now, for those that you don't know, EU imports are governed by quotas. And you see here in 2019, there's 4 little black lines, which are the quotas. So in the raw meat, because of the scandal in Brazil with from some of the companies with salmonella, you see that Brazil doesn't take anywhere near the quota. It has a quota of 180,000 tons. It's only doing just over 100,000. Thailand, we are close to our quota. We have a quota of about 90,000 tons a year. We are near. On the cooked side, Brazil also, don't seem to be interested in the cooked products to Europe. But you see Thailand, we are about 30% over our quota. And what does the quota mean? In the quota, you get a very low tariff. If you are over the quota, you get a very high tariff. But it's been worth for the European importers to import from Thailand, still cheaper than producing themselves. But one thing that is happening in Europe, Poland has increased its production hugely over the last decade. They are now the largest. They have about 22 to 23% of all the production in the EU. That includes the UK. And a lot of their production has gone to the UK to the food service. So they've been hurt a lot. So there's a lot of inventory in Europe with breast meat. And this will complicate how we recover our breast meat exports to Europe in the coming months. And then showing what happened with the prices. So in the middle of 2018, again, these spikes very much tied to the way that the quota works. So in order to get your quota, you had to deposit or a guarantee of 500 euros a metric ton. And if you did not export the quota you were given as an importer, you lost your 500 euros. So you always had a huge panic buying from February each year up to June, because the quota year is July to June. So you see there the prices in June, July of 2018 were 130 baht, 120 baht. That is getting on for $4,000 a ton. When it went all the way down to 60 baht, we came back a bit again for quota reasons, June, July 2019, a little bit this year, but only up to nearly 80 baht, i.e. this was about $2,400, $2,500. And now we are difficult to get to $2,000. And Brazil now is actually selling breast meat at $1,500, $1,600 around the world. So it will be difficult for Thailand to recover its pricing. And that is why we need that exchange rate. If we have poor dollar prices allied to a very strong exchange rate, then this is a problem for us economically. So conclusions on demand. You're having this imbalance of the parts, the problems of Europe reducing the breast meat, and this demand, although if you look at the total numbers, China compensates Europe. No, it doesn't. You cannot substitute a breast meat by wings and feet. As I said, feet is only 2.5%. And then our domestic markets, it would depend very much how our economies recover. As I said, I don't think we've seen the worst because of the government help, but they can't help forever. And when people have jobs, there will still be a lot of unemployed people, and unemployment benefits in our part of the world are not very high. Recovery will be slow. Economies will take time to recover. There is a lot of debate. There are some very good webinars every week by financial institutions around the world, and whether it's going to be a V-shape, which is going to happen very quickly. The stock market's been a V-shape, but the rest of the world is not the stock market. And then there's the U-shape where the bottom will take some time before it recovers. And then when you have an L-shaped where the recovery is much slower. Now, with the amount of unemployed around the world, and we are seeing what is happening in the US, we are seeing what is happening in Australia, of the virus coming back and causing lockdown, more localized lockdowns now, this will have a natural effect on demand. So let's move on a little bit to the second source of disruption, which is this social distancing. As most of you know, any processing plant, whether it's pork or beef or chicken, you have a lot of people in an enclosed space, in the changing rooms, in the on the processing line, in the canteens. And in Thailand, we have not heard of any plant. I've not heard of any plant in Asia that has had a significant number of infections and have had to close down. There have been plants in Brazil, and in Brazil there is a public health inspector in each city, and they go to inspect the plant nearly on a daily basis. We don't have that situation. I have heard of a hatchery in Thailand being affected. So, but the line speeds are a bit slower. Then people will work an extra day with rotating shifts to make up for the lost production. In Brazil, there's been about a 4 to 5% drop in production, and indications are in Thailand that we are down about 10 to 15% compared to the the pre-March levels. So in Brazil, US, and Europe, they've had multiple plants with very high infection rates, and it's affected the local communities. And what China now, this is obviously news, and what China is starting to do is to suspend shipments from plants that have had infections or have been closed for a certain point of time. And this will, with the USA seems to be recovering, but Brazil still has its worst to come. And it's actually, a lot of the infections are in the geographic parts of Brazil where the plants are. Now, the companies in Brazil are taking all the precautions on distancing as much as possible, staggering the shifts, giving people like a shower before they go into the production. But it is not easy when you have 4,000 people in a plant. And then the final source of disruption is the logistics. As Rose said, there were problems with the plant of Adeseo in France. So there was news that there would be problems with amino acids. The other disruptions in Asia, there have been transport difficulties. Charter planes before the eggs and the chicks, they came on normal passenger planes with Thai Airways, Lufthansa, and some of the Emirates, very, very strong in this. Within the Philippines, you have a problem where you have a lot of the breeding done in the southern island, and then the eggs sent up to the north. That has had a problem. And sometimes you've got far-reaching consequences. As Rose said about the whey, how did that affect? Well, whey is a very important byproduct in the dairy. It is also a very important part in the formulations for the piglets. So no piglets, no formulation for whey, no whey, and this really collapsed the whey prices. And then we saw a few weeks ago the oil price collapse when they actually had to pay to give it away. This had a knock-on effect to ethanol and a reduction in ethanol, and therefore corn prices went back significantly. So you see how complex we are, where something that happens in one part of the world or in one industry suddenly affects us on a day-to-day basis economically in our poultry industry. And then looking forward, there's a consensus in all the literature that I've been reading from the main consultants. Everybody is reviewing in depth their supply chain. People are really going to have to know a lot more about their supply chain. They need to know who are the suppliers of their suppliers. I've only actually seen one company do this really well until now. So suppliers, where are the suppliers of their suppliers? Are they in a risk country? What are the suppliers' inventory? We've lived for many, many years in all industries on a just-in-time basis. I think that will change. And there will be a much more of a partnership between big suppliers and big customers. And one of the worrying things for me, for exporting, and maybe for you as importers, is your country looking to be more food secure and less dependent on imports? Will you try to become more self-sufficient, even though from an economic point of view, it might not be the most indicated, but from a food security point of view, the last thing that you want to do as a government is that any of your population did not have enough to eat. So then recovery is when and how quickly. There's a lot of work done. There's a lot of very good webinars around Asia from companies like Nielsen, Kantar, etc. They don't quite often say very much about our industry, but it's a question of how quickly will people go back and eat in the food service restaurants, eat in restaurants. or will they stop to buy it to eat at home? I think Asia is less affected because a lot of people, we still go and buy our chicken or pork on the street or seafood on the street. As people start to go back to work, they will buy their lunch on the street. So I think we will be maybe less affected than some of the major countries who then affect Thai exports. So one message from McKinsey, that the path to the next normal is uncertain and will differ from each country, sector, and company. And there you should be seeing how you are going to prepare for the transition. And then a final message from myself, the slaughterhouses of tomorrow of all proteins will be very different from today. There will be much more automation and digitalization, which it seemed to be moving and now it seemed to have stopped a little bit, but digitalization from placing of parent stock to the food on the consumer's table will be an essential normal. Why do I say that? Because the variability of supply and the variation in production levels, you need to be able to work out in minutes what is the effect on your hatchery, on your breeding, on your broiler, on all the packing material, etc. You want to be able to work out in minutes what the effect of Mr. Trump suddenly creating a problem is causing at the moment. To do it without digitalization, you take some time. And then finally, you have to have a strong balance sheet. Not so much in Asia where the banks are more understanding, but certainly in the Brazils and the US, you are starting to see bankruptcies because people did not have a strong balance sheet before the problem started. So that was the tale of two viruses. Thank you very much. This is my email. And so the presentation will be available to you with a link that will be given. And then I've given you a lot of data, a lot to absorb in very short time, 40 minutes. So if you have questions afterwards, you have my email, and please be welcome. I will answer as possible. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Gordon. I think we passed over the time already, but I already informed the audience that we would have another 20 minutes if you would stay with us, because there is a lot of question and answer question that come in that I may ask Mr. Gordon to stay with us another 15 minutes to answer on the question. Back to the statement on Europe has reduced the importation. One of the things that we could see that the food service and restaurant has been closed. That's why the demand is dropped. At the same time, in many of webinar or even my own webinar on the food sector, saying that the rice is coming with the e-commerce or the online order of grocery. I would like to ask your idea, like if the food service hotel back to normal, the demand or the specification or requirement, it start to change into the new normal pattern, or the things like animal welfare will be related, or the demand from the country that have infected COVID will be affected when they choose to import meat in or not?
As we saw, especially in early March, in the developed world, and we saw it in Thailand, and I'm sure in other places in Asia, where everybody rushed to the supermarket, but they buy different products at retail than they buy in the quick service restaurant, and it's a different packaging. So it created a huge difference in difficulties in production to actually move from one type of product to another. And now they will move back. It doesn't make any difference, I think, on things like the animal welfare, because we have to have the same levels of animal welfare even with the lower volumes. But those change of habits. So each individual company, I am sure, will be watching very carefully how it's going to have to change its product mix and the packaging, because you have completely different packaging to retail. And quite often, one of the problems in Malaysia, for example, that the packaging industry was not classified as a necessity industry. So therefore, people could not go to work in the packaging industries. And then they said, well, look, this is a necessary industry to get back to normal. So these sort of things happened, and going back to normal, but I don't think our new normal will be completely the same as the old normal.
All right, so I would say that the new normal already start with the farm biosecurity, that people have to be more careful and implement more biosecurity. Now we have to watch out what will happen into the food service in terms of buying pattern, maybe from few of our webinars saying that people are looking for more transparent products. So meaning to say that the packaging playing the very important role. Consumer also want to understand the source where the chicken meat come from, and what I would say it's called like clear label. So come to the next question. It's a bit on the recover, Kun Gordon. It's like there is a question from our audience from Malaysia. He asks like, do you see a V shape will recover end of this year?
No, the end of this year, I just really don't see it. We are seeing we're not quite sure if it's a second wave or an extension of the first wave. This is going to be until the vaccine comes. There's no end to this. It's very interesting now. I deal with a lot of people from banks around the world, in Europe, in Thailand, in Brazil, and in the US. All of us now, besides being economists and accountants, we are epidemiologists. I'm not even sure to say it correctly. But so now we are looking at what Dr. Fauci says every day in the US. But we have a problem that now, unfortunately, the scientists cannot agree between themselves. So it's a little bit difficult, but you do arrive at the conclusion that this is going to be around for a long time. And even with a vaccine, so many people said, I will not take the vaccine. And unless everybody takes the vaccine, you don't resolve the problem.
Sorry for technical problem. I think because of internet of my host it's little down. So I would say that some of you may not hear the last sentence of Mr. Gordon. Can you repeat a bit, Mr. Gordon? Sorry for the internet down.
I said, I think the last step was that the farm, I don't see the farm being so much of an issue, but especially in the slaughterhouses, I think some of the changes that we've had to put in because of COVID, they will be permanent. And I'm sure the equipment suppliers are coming out with new ways. How can we be secure in usage? And one point that you brought up, all the consumers in the world, they are even more health conscious now. Infections, everybody might say it's safe, 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 but some of us will say, well, I don't want to eat meat factory that's one. Tell everybody we have a problem and cannot hide it away because the newspapers will find it.
All right, come to the next two questions, and I will make it. So the question is about Brazilian and US market. Right now, there is a lot of cheap product from Brazil coming into the importing countries. Why in Southeast Asia, especially, I would say the question from Thai, like Thailand has a lot of overstock, the frozen meat in the fridge. So how long you think that situation would last? Because now from what you trying to explain to the audience that it takes 100 days.
Prices. I just go to one of the supermarkets every Saturday and look at all the prices, and all of a sudden the price of the wing and the price of the leg has gone up. That indicates there's a shortage, and the price of the breast meat has gone down. It's an excess. So it's a question then of companies and how each individual company has a balance between its each of its parts that it sells. So some companies have no problems, and other companies have serious problems if they were very, very dependent on Europe. So it really is a question of balancing the chicken more. It's not going to be everything is full up with all the chicken. No, in fact, as I've said, there is a shortage of many parts of the chicken.
Okay, to the last question now, new normal. Many countries looking for domestic production and consumption. Is it really affect the way that we are trying to create value of product through export? Because people will just, the government will just try to be self-sufficient by domestic production.
This could affect, and if I'm maybe Brazil or the US, I would be more worried than Thailand, because now with ASEAN, and we have seen, the increase in exports from Thailand to the rest of Asia. Although, yes, in the Philippines and Vietnam, we have seen a situation. Now, Vietnam has a shortage of protein, and we see Philippines a shortage of protein. But the day that the production of swine goes back again, a lot of that demand for will diminish, and there's the products that are imported. As Philippines produces a smaller bird, some of the products for the food service cannot be supplied from production from the Philippines itself. So if you want to become self-sufficient, you have to be, as a country, more flexible. Thailand has always been very flexible. Brazil wants to produce a 3-kilo bird, and it doesn't want to change. Whereas Thailand, one of the big things in Thailand, we like to give our customer what our customer wants. This is not everywhere in the world does that. Now, most of you today, you are from Philippines, from Malaysia, from Vietnam, which are domestic markets. You have to follow, is there any change in the habits of your people? Is there, then you might have to be more flexible. Let's say in a lot of your countries, you're only the whole bird. In Vietnam, you do have biosecurity issues. So all these things, if you want to substitute those imports, you have to get up to the same level of biosecurity. You cannot have one product which is a certain level of biosecurity, animal welfare, than your own production. But things will change, and each individual company that's watching, you have to see how it's going to change for you. It's not the headline in the newspaper that you can read, well, that's going to change. No, then you have to see how it's going to change your country and how it's going to affect you.
All right, so it's come to the end. I will share the question that I haven't raised it in this webinar to Mr. Gordon, and he will answer to you. Definitely, you can reach to him directly. There are a lot of interesting parts that we can bring into focus to help the integrators that look for how to balance the whole chicken and make sure that it is zero stock in your company, refrigerator, because consumer prefer to eat differently. Like Mr. Gordon said, in Western you prefer the breast meat, in Japan you prefer the chicken rump. So that is very interesting to know and learn and understand how we could balance it. So
can I say one thing, please?
Yes, please.
And don't forget, the chicken is easy. The chicken is 2 to 2.5 kilos. Your pig is 100 kilos. Your cattle is 700 kilos. So even on a pig, you have to get rid of every part of the 100 kilos. So it's not only a chicken issue, this about getting rid of all the parts of the animal.
So we will make sure that we'll arrange to hear more about how to get rid of every part of the animal with the financial bringing back to your pocket. So today, I would like to say thank you to our audience to stay with us, and definitely thank you very much to Mr. Gordon to stay with us today with the very long presentation and very informative. So I hope to see you guys again with our next webinar. Webinar more on the technical aspect by Dr. Narin Upakarin, which he will focus on the intestinal of the poultry. See you again, and please feel free to register for our first time ever online exhibition, which will focus on livestock Philippines 28 to 30 July. Thank you very much and have a good day.